Okay, excellent. You know, once upon a time, and in a previous life, I used to be a ship finance banker. And in those days, when we were financing vessels, we very often just called up the borrower, the ship owner, and we said, you know, what's the condition of the vessel? And he would send across his condition survey, and how had he taken that condition survey. He'd sent his own technical manager probably to visit the ship, and they'd come up with a report. And that was what the bank relied on. But the world, of course, has changed. And that's definitely not the case anymore. And now we want a lot more standardization of methodology and of data. And that's what Idwal is all about. So, George, perhaps we can just start. Maybe you could just tell us when was Idwal established and what's the bread and butter of Idwal's business?
Thank you very much, Kevin. Yeah, so Idwal started off about 2012-13, and at the time it was a bank, actually. It started with the banking industry. A bank had a distressed portfolio, and they came to Idwal and said, can you come and look at these ships and give us an impartial view on the ships? And so it started out in that place. Just basically there were plenty of superintendents working for, in those days, Greig Ship Management, who were able to do it, and it was giving an impartial inspection. There was a little bit happening back then in the S&P world as well. We would do pre-purchase inspections where a buyer couldn't get on board the ship himself. So what he would do is he would send someone from Idwal to go and do a pre-purchase inspection. We then, in 2019, and to be clear, this was all before my time, so it wasn't my genius, if you like, that did it. But in 2019, we actually worked in conjunction with MOL. As I'm sure many people know here, the way the Japanese majors sell their ships is they invite offers at any given time, and it's up to the buyers to make their offers by then. And we worked to come up with this pre-sale concept. And how that works is that the seller instructs us to go on board the ship on their behalf. We then produce an impartial report, and we'll talk to impartiality a little bit later as well, but it's absolutely essential in this that it is impartial. So we will make this impartial report, after which we give a copy to the seller. At this stage, we have only been, I won't say acted for, I'll say we've only been working with the seller. And during that process, once the seller receives the report, it's their decision as to whether they use that report to sell the ship or not. If they're not happy with the report, they don't have to use it, and no one ever knows they even inspected the ship with us. However, if they are happy with the report, they can put the ship on the market basis, an Idwal report being available. What perhaps isn't understood very well here, and is a risk to this whole concept, is that the report is actually there to be bought by the buyer for, you used the word earlier, for reliance, right? And that is key, because if the seller gives a copy of the report to the buyer, they're buying a ship basis a seller's own due diligence. They have we're not even able to discuss it with them at that point. And the reason for that is because our contract is only with the seller. So the minute it's purchased from the buyer, there is a legal reliance onto Idwal, which is key, which means we can be sued. We are saying that this is the honest state of the ship. So that's what's changed things. That's what really the main thing of how we've got to where we are today. I'll talk a bit more about what we do for banks, what we do for owners, charterers later, but that's the abridged version of Idwal up until today.
Okay, very good. And we're talking here about standardized methodology, and that's critical, isn't it? That basically the methodology you utilize in order to do these inspections is the same across the board.
Yep, absolutely. So it starts really at a process level. Let's be clear. I talked about the impartiality. So what we have with ship inspections is, it was one of the most, or perhaps arguably still in many areas, is one of the most archaic areas of the industry. Exactly as you said, you get a superintendent who is qualified to inspect the ship because he's an ex-captain or chief engineer. He focuses on certain areas which are his areas of interest. Or perhaps last inspection, he noticed an issue with the free-fall lifeboat. So next inspection, the first thing he does, he goes and looks at the free-fall lifeboat. Right? It's these sort of things that happen. So what what needs to be done in the industry and what we have done within Idwal is we've standardized the approach. You also can't take away the individuality and the ability of the surveyor to use his experience to spot things. That would be very dangerous as well. So it can't be a robotic inspection where it's pure check, check, check. But what you do need to do is you need to make sure that everything that needs to be checked is checked, and then there is an additional amount. So that standardized sort of process, if you like, the way we do it is we have a checklist which needs to be observed, and we work it down so that the surveyor ultimately, the surveyor is trained by our surveyor management team. He passed he passed a test to join Idwal. We then grade the surveyors in the background to trend the performance of the surveyor. So at every stage we bring in standards, we bring in processes, even down to the final vetting of the report. So the surveyor does not produce the report. The surveyor collects the information, and then it is our technical team of ex-master mariners and chief engineers. They review that information and create the report, and then we peer review that report to make sure it's absolutely standard. And it's absolutely key in our opinion that ultimately the end users of the reports get something that is not at the whim of an individual. It's been vetted and it's followed a standardized process.
And just to give us an idea, how much data do you have? I mean, you've been doing this for quite a few years now. You've inspected many, many ships. I mean, what's the volume?
So where we're sitting at the moment is we're at about fully graded inspections. We're about 10,700 as of today. And that's growing significantly. We're adding another 3,000 a year now. We've gone back and made sure that that is 10,700 comparable data sets that we have, effectively. Can
I just add, do they have a kind of a timeline? For example, if you inspected something 12 months ago, would you still rely on that, or would you prefer to go and do a new inspection?
So for the inspection on its own, this is a great question. It's the way the industry works is that the time at which the ship is inspected and then the time is sold and then the time at which the ship is delivered are three separate things, right? So we feel it is prudent, for want of better words, to have an inspection report on the asset within, let's say, 3 months of the ship being sold. Of the ship being inspected to take delivery. That's not always the case that it's possible. I come from a ship management background myself, and I know exactly how quickly, if a ship is left, it can deteriorate if it's not maintained properly. But I think, the reality is that is up to the buyer, and it's up to the financier to make that call, right? The financier should be looking at the time. When we see a report that is more than 3 months old, we will suggest to the seller, you may want to get this ship re-inspected, because we think, the buying market generally prefers reports to be in 3 months. But it's more dictated by the buyer and the seller to beware, if you like, yeah.
Let's jump over to finance just for a minute. I mean, so how can the Idwal grade, so to speak, be used in the corporate finance or the M&A world?
So, again, it was done before my time, so you probably notice a theme here, but the introduction of the Idwal grade, I think what a lot of people in the industry feel about it is that it is just there as a tool for buying and selling ships. There's actually an awful lot more to it. So there's 500 data points taken during an inspection. Okay, so as an example, when the surveyor goes into the cargo hold or the ballast tanks, the way the questions are asked, and we talk about standardized methodology, the way they're asked for us is was corrosion noted of the protective coating? No is no, and it's done. Yes, okay, was it scattered or was it spot? It was a spot. Was it pitting? Was it scarring? It's getting too technical for me now, but it breaks its way down. And then what percentage of corrosion was detected? So the important thing here is what you realize is in our data warehouse, we then have a data point, right? So what we can do with that is we can use 500 data points to work them way up at the highest level to an overall Idwal grade. It's an algorithm. It's not someone in Idwal going, oh, we'll give that one a 75, we'll give that one a... It doesn't work like that. And it doesn't change, right? right? And we have lots of arguments from people, oh, no, crew welfare shouldn't count for our Idwal grade. We argue it should. We want to improve the agenda of crew welfare. So anyway, I've digressed a little bit here, but back on topic. So how can it be used? It can be benchmarked, it can be trended. So I've already talked about how we do it at an individual asset level, but what we've just done recently, and it's the sort of next step for us, and fantastically it's a corroboration of what we're doing, is for a corporate transaction, i.e. a company looking to sell the whole lot, not just their fleet, but the whole lot. It's 120 ships. Just before anyone gets excited, it's 120 quite niche, bespoke. It's not, Frontline up for sale or something like that, right? So 120 ships where we've done physical inspections on 25 of them, and on 95 we've done remote asset reviews, and we've graded them. So what happens is, of those, so we've got 120 inspection reports, but we've also created a 60-page document on top of that which reviews the fleet. And that is where we use the data. That is where we say that overall the average grade was 77 against an industry benchmark average for these asset types of similar ages, types, sizes of 75. The areas in which the fleet was performing particularly well was in the accommodation area. There were more issues in area X, Y, Z, right? So we're able to get it down relatively granular, which allows the eventual buyer to get a clear overview of the fleet. We're also able to provide reliance on that. So effectively what happens now is, if for that transaction in the VDR will sit the commercial due diligence, the legal due diligence, the finance due diligence, and now the vendor technical due diligence. So we've actually been involved in a lot of transactions historically which we didn't realize we were involved in. International Seaways, Diamond S, when they merged, we inspected all of the ships, but we did that on an ad hoc basis. Can you inspect these ships? And then we found the company was for sale. Same with Taylor Maritime and IVS. We inspected a lot of them. There's more, but I don't want to start.
Are banks perhaps approaching you to ask them to do something on a portfolio basis?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got banks in two tranches, if you like. We've got investment banks who are advising on corporate transactions approaching us now to do these type of vendor due diligence. And absolutely, we work with a lot of banks across the spectrum, from the sort of alternative lenders who have obviously a higher risk profile on their tonnage, who will vet every single ship on a pre-finance basis, and then do a larger percentage of their fleet, maybe 20, 50. In fact, some banks will do 100% of their fleet they will inspect annually. To the other end of the spectrum, where you have banks who have got relatively small investments in the actual assets, and they're maybe syndicated, etc., and they'll just do the odd spot check now.
Okay. But what about, we just heard about retrofits. I mean, so a lot of new things are being sort of fitted onto vessels. Is that something that you're looking at, or will be looking at, and will be adding to your inspection reports about, how many of these new technologies are being fitted onto vessels? So
I think this is where we need to get better. We record that information. We record whether there is a MEVIS duct or a PBCF, or whether it's got low friction anti-foul, etc., and it's noted in the inspection report. But what we need to start doing as a company is unlocking more of that data and explaining, what the trends are that we are seeing for fitting in the industry, because we actually we're sector agnostic. We don't work with one class society, one flag, so we get quite a broad spectrum of the industry. And so that's, yes, we've got the data, but we're not using it as well as we should. And that's sort of one of the next stages for us, is probably the answer to that.
Perfect. So final question, George. 5 years from now, where do you see Idwal, and what your contribution to the shipping industry?
5 years, right? So firstly, we're looking at what the trends are in the industry, and we're trying to sort of almost support those trends at a very, very small part we do. So crew welfare is something we identified 2 years ago that we wanted to bring in to try and improve crew welfare. as an example. I sort of dropped this in earlier. So with crew welfare, one of our subgrades in our reports is crew welfare. And there's things like, the quality of not just if there's Wi-Fi on board, the quality, if it's free for the crew, gym equipment, access to shore leave, all these questions factor in for the crew welfare. So the next step of that for us is ESG reporting at an asset level. So we've produced an ESG report recently that we can do alongside a condition inspection. So grading at asset level ESG. So for those people who work in companies who have corporate ESG reports, they'll be used to working to sort of SASB standards or whatever that they might use to give their reports. But we can do it at an asset level as well. So seeing that feeding in. But to really directly answer that question, 5 years from now, what do I want or where do I hope to see us or where will we be, let's be positive, is we will be the guys who benchmark ships. So we will have owners using our grades to see which of the ships in their fleet are performing or not performing on asset condition.
Yep. Perfect. George, thank you very much. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers.